In this video, we're going to cover the set position up here. We have already covered the set position, which is down here with stance, posture, hook, and grip. And we're also going to cover how to go from set position to setup position in the easiest way possible. And I'm going to be sure to include a bunch of Barebow specific tips and tricks on how to execute the KSL Shot Cycle or the NTS System properly with Barebow. So this is the latest installment of the Barebow Archery Form Series. We've already covered a few things already. I'll be sure to have links in the description below, plus a card at the top up there for the rest of the playlist. You should start there and then progress into this video after that, because we've already started setting the basis for a few important key principles that we have to continue to keep moving forward in this video. Sorry about the move indoors. We just have a bit of a weather front coming in, and I don't want to get the camera gear wet, so we're going to finish out the rest of the video in here. Setup position is an actual position up here where I pause very, very slightly and briefly before I draw the bow back, before I load the bow. And it's a quick spot to have a quick check-in of how do I feel. Did I lose my hip tension? Did I change my hip positioning? Am I starting to lean forward or back? Am I losing the position of my hook? Am I losing my grip position? Am I changing things at all? Did I lift with my chest and lose my posture? Those are all quick little things that you should be mentally checking and, checking in. How do you feel? And if you have a mirror or a camera that you watch yourself shoot, how do you look? And that's the whole point of setup, is just to have that quick little moment to check. So as far as the actual positioning of the setup position, it is very similar to the set position in the principles that we're trying to achieve. Mainly what we're trying to do is try to already be in ideal of alignment as possible. The whole point of this entire system, the KSL Shot Cycle, the NTS system, is to use bones, or more of a biomechanically efficient technique, to hold the bow back, to hold the main draw weight when we're at full draw, using bones to stack together. That'd be like stacking together your fingers like this together and pushing really hard. If you have good alignment, it's easy to maintain this position. If you were to have the alignment broken and you push together, in order to maintain, you have to squeeze your fingers down, acting more on the muscles rather than the bones to hold the structure. So while we get into set up position, we are already trying to progress towards optimal alignment while at full draw. Now, yes, what we are doing is we're in this position. We're not even remotely close to full draw yet. However, we can already get into alignment in a little way. Actually, in two different ways. One would be the alignment from this wrist, this shoulder, to this shoulder. That is the main driving factor of alignment when we're talking archery. And getting to a straight line between those 3 points, again, those two shoulders and that front wrist, if they're in a straight line, that is good alignment. If they are in a triangle like this, that is a weak position like this. And so when you're in that position, the bow would want to pull you back much easier than if you had proper alignment. How do we achieve these 3 points being in a line in set up position? So it's very simple. We have already talked about set, stance, posture, hook, and grip, and we're in this position right before we go to lift the bow. Now, set up position would be here, and you can see I am in a triangle, these 3 points in regards to the actual target line, and as I go to lift here, set up, now you can see I am in a straight line. So what happens in between the two is not really too complicated. It requires a little bit of coordination, and it'll require some trial and error on your part if this is new to you, but essentially I'm just going from this position and I am rotating my torso independent of my hips. You'll notice as I go to lift my bow that my hips stay over my feet and ankles. They don't twist and turn, but my torso twists and turns independent of this. So I've got my hook, grip, stance, and posture. I'm in set position. And now as I go from set to set up, you'll see this main torso twist, but not a hip twist. Set, set up. So it's not too bad. it's mainly driven by this rotation here. So lifting the bow into proper alignment with the shoulders, which Coach Lee calls the barrel of the gun, he uses this as a reference point for talking about just what I would call like a Coach Lee-ism, basically, an analogy for a position. So the barrel of the gun, if you would, is what he calls it, and that's just basically your bone structure. These shoulders being in a straight line along with your bow arm. Why he calls it a barrel of the gun is a simple principle. If you have a triangle here, your barrel is only so short. If you have a good alignment, your barrel gets longer, meaning the longest point of the straight piece here is very short, but when you add in the shoulders, it lengthens it. And when you're shooting firearms, in general, a longer barrel is more accurate and more consistent, and that's why he called it a barrel of the gun, using the analogy that a rifle is more accurate than a pistol. So, I know there are a lot of people out there that don't like this analogy because it brings firearms into archery, but whether or not you like it, we are firing projectiles. Using a bow, we are firing projectiles with a firearm. So, I'm sorry, but we are not using a tennis racket here. At least we're talking similar types of sporting activities. To get the longer barrel of the gun, or correct alignment, is easy. You just rotate the torso to get into position. The main thing you would be looking for in a mirror, if you were my mirror, if I look at my camera viewfinder that I have pointing at me, I can go from set position, and I'm sorry, I'm going to look slightly off camera, to set up position, and what I'm looking for is trying to start to see this scapula back there. If I can start to see the tip of that scapula kind of come out and around behind me like that, I'll know that I'm starting to get into alignment. Because if I couldn't see my back here, I'm in bad alignment, right? If I can see my back here, I'm in better alignment. What we used at the Olympic Training Center while we were doing this in front of a mirror, we were required at the time to have a USA across our back. So what we would look for, right-handed shooters, would be the tip of the leg of the letter A starting to be visible on this far right side of the back of our shirts. And that gave us a good indicator of, do I have good alignment? If I have good alignment while at full draw, even in a barebow anchor, I can see my back scapula when I'm pointing directly at the camera here. Recurve anchor, you can see it more, of course, but barebow anchor, you can almost still see it. So that's a quick little thing to look for to know that you're in good alignment, is to check for your back scapula being visible when you're pointing straight at a camera or straight at a mirror. Another thing you can potentially do to check your alignment in set up position is to angle down. And if I angle down like this, I can see I'm relatively in a straight line. Improper alignment in a triangle, proper alignment in a straight line. The second key to the alignment is keeping the elbow behind the arrow line. I've already shown you in the set position what the elbow behind the arrow line looks like. Essentially what it is, if this was my bow and this was my hand on the string, elbow is outside the arrow line in this position, elbow is behind the arrow line in this position here. The reason that being behind the arrow line is important, when you have proper alignment at full draw, ideally your elbow will be behind the arrow line, okay? So if it's behind the arrow line while at full draw in the proper ideal alignment, down here in set position, we can get into the proper alignment, so we can continue that up here in set position. You can see my elbow is in line or behind the arrow line when I'm here in my set position when it comes to barebow archery. The two main things are twisting of the torso to get the shoulders in a line, and the bringing the hand further out away from your body, not really far, just enough outside of the line that you would be here in order to get that elbow behind the arrow line in this position here, setup position. One of the things that you absolutely have to pay attention to is not following your bow to brace height when you go to lift the bow. That is the number one absolute cause of improper alignment, a breaking of the barrel of the gun, if you will, when you go from set to setup. It is following your bow to brace height. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if I'm here in set position like this, and I go to lift my bow to set up position and I follow brace height, you'll see that I look like this. So from this view, from set to set up, following to brace height, look at my shoulders. It's in a triangle, my elbow's outside of my arrow line. That's because you're sticking to brace height here. So set, set up, that is brace height. I'm at brace height, right? But if I do not follow it to brace height and I dictate the bow's positioning through my own body positioning, you'll see that I draw the bow back partially. I'll do it with an arrow so you can see how much I'm actually drawing the bow back. I go from set here, hook grip stance posture. Now I dictate it and you'll see where the label is on my arrow pretty far forward. If I go from set to set up, now you'll see that my bow is partially drawn back, right? Pretty simple and straightforward. So set, set up. So it's a simple lift, raise, and twist all at the same time. Set, set up. It's easy to do with a much lighter bow than this. That's why I'm gonna grab my wife's bow, so I can demonstrate this a little bit more easily without struggling so much, and I'm not dealing with the sniper dropping on me all the time. So set, do not follow to brace height, and now I dictate shoulders in proper alignment, elbow behind the arrow line, and that is my setup position. So with a bow, doing it towards you correctly, set, bow's pointing to the left of you, and as I go to lift, it still points to the left of you, but my hand is still pointing directly at you, my target, and that's how I would actually shoot. So set, set up. So the hand comes straight up. You don't see any sort of rainbow or candy cane or whatever it used to be called. Set, set up. Hand moves up vertically, perfectly, and does not do any sort of arcing motion. It is staying between me and my target. The bow hand moves just straight up, and my string hand essentially goes from here in set position straight up to set up position. So from this angle, you'll see my hand is back here, about shoulder distance-ish, in set position, and as I lift, set up. That's roughly how you go from set to set up. Those are a couple of things to pay attention to when moving from set to setup. So don't stick to brace height, dictate the bow's draw length for your body position, and try to push for the proper body position to enhance the alignment that we're trying to achieve earlier in the shot, as early as possible. The positioning here, where do I end up? So setup position is roughly here. What I mean by here is if I were to have an angle finder and I were to go from the alignment of these 3 points and compare that angle to this angle here, the angle of the upper bone in my arm here, it should be about 90 degrees. If I were to bend over, this is setup position, and you can see the angle from my alignment to this bone here is about 90 degrees. I would never go less than 90 degrees. I would always go at least 90 degrees, if not a little bit further back. Again, this is much different than following your bow to brace height. If I follow my bow to brace height, you'll see my angle is much less than 90 degrees. Trying to stay at that minimum of a 90-degree angle is ideal for a couple of reasons. Mainly is to prevent shoulder impingement. Shoulder impingement I've already covered a few times in a couple of videos. If you're interested in learning more about shoulder impingement, what causes it, and how to prevent it, I'll put links in the description below, plus a card at the top up there. It's definitely one of the #1 pain sources and injury sources that I've seen related to archery, and it's due to impingement issues in the draw shoulder for the most part. So preventing that is pretty simple. Being at a 90-degree minimum angle, minimum 90 degrees, anywhere from here back, basically, and not going above the height of your draw shoulder with the draw hand. So in set position, right here, you'll see my hand is right about shoulder height. I do not go higher than that. When I go higher than that and or closer forward, it closes up the subacromial space, which leads to impingement. And you'll see I won't even do that position with a bow because it hurts that bad for me, and I deal with shoulder issues all the time. So I'd rather you be on the safe side and not have these issues that I have. 90-degree minimum, roughly this height. I wouldn't go lower than that, no need. The elbow can be lower, more importantly, than the draw hand. Definitely, you can be here at 90 degrees, hand in the right position, but a high elbow, although that's probably pretty rare, I've never seen people do that, and having a lower elbow than the draw hand is absolutely okay because it opens up that space, and I don't see any risk for injury that way. Now the bow hand is roughly eye level. This is something that I've noticed is different from Olympic style recurve to barebow, is I have to lift my hand up much higher in my setup position in order to be really close to the target with my arrow point to aim with while at full draw. Because, you know, Olympic style recurve, we have a sight pin that's way up here, and with barebow, our sight pin's way down here, our arrow. So I've noticed that in my recurve setup position, I'm about here, right? My barebow setup position, I'm about here. I'm much higher with the draw hand, because if I draw back with that hand in that higher position, I am more likely to be very close to my point of aim when I get the bow back. As I start to set my string alignment and all those things, my sight pin, my arrow, is closer to the center of the target when I start with my hand slightly elevated compared to Olympic style recurve. So instead of my sight pin cresting and crossing the target line, the view from my eye to my target, as I lift my bow from set to setup, I now cross the target line with at least my arrow, if not my plunger area, and I lift and I settle in and draw the bow back like that. So it's just much higher up compared to Olympic style recurve, simply because of how we aim with barebow. So that is the positioning of the actual set position. Good alignment, hand roughly eye level height, and this hand roughly chin height. You can be in somewhere in this position. For me, my chin is right about at my wrist here, so I'm a little bit more than 90 degrees like this, and I'm never above my chin height because I don't want to cause impingement issues. Now, how do you get from set to setup easily? So the way that you do that is just by rotating the torso. If you can't do this here naturally without losing the hips, again, make sure you're tearing your paper towels all the way through this movement, otherwise you will change and lose your hip positioning. It's actually quite simple. As I lift the bow, I am reaching to the target, and I am pushing with the hand as far as I can towards the target. The reason being is, and I'll use the edge of the frame here, like so, if I have a elevated bow shoulder or improper alignment, you'll see my hand moves back relative in space to the edge of the frame here. Normally I do it with a door frame, but this works here. To get into this proper alignment, all I need to do is simply reach as far as I can. If I'm reaching as far as I can relative to the target without reaching, because that's not the kind of reach I'm talking about, just reaching to the target, maintaining my structure here, I'm now in a proper alignment. So quickly, and I'll exaggerate this so you can see, if I'm short and I'm angling downhill so you can see my alignment, you'll see my alignment's improper. If I do nothing other than reach, you'll see that my alignment gets better. Very, very simple. The draw hand is, again, staying in position here, not any less than 90 degrees. So if you have this 90 degrees improper alignment, and then I do nothing but reach, improper alignment, but I'm at 90 degrees and I do nothing but reach, now I am in proper alignment. I've set that alignment in setup position, and the elbow is outside of the arrow line because my arrow is pointing to the left of you, just like in set position. Another thing to note is that when you're shooting barebow, you've got a riser with a ton of weight packed on it, and it's got a decent amount of heft to it. So, if I am standing naturally, my weight balance is evenly distributed between my 2 feet, right? But once I have something that is weighted outside of my center line and I'm holding it at full draw, if I were to maintain the balance equally between my 2 feet from here to here, you'll see that I lean backwards to compensate for the weight of the bow being outside of my center line. And a lot of people will lean back because they're trying to keep the balance even between their 2 feet, even when they have this extra weight outside of their center line. So the ideal way to do it is actually to maintain your structure here vertically, because that's part of posture. And as I go from set to setup, you'll see I don't lean back, right? And the only way to prevent that is to feel your weight shift further forward as you move this bow further outside the center line of your body. So as you go from set to setup, you'll feel more weight shift forward to your front foot. The heavier your bow is and the lighter you are, the more that weight will shift forward relative to your center line. So for me, my center point of pressure, if I were to take an arrow and stick it in the ground, that would be where the central point of my reference is for the weight distribution amongst my feet, is pretty close to the ball of my front foot, if not a little bit outside of the ball of my front foot. That again is going to prevent you from leaning back. So as I lift, I reach, I maintain my position here, I maintain my hip position through paper towel tearing, and I go from set to set up. And it's really not any more difficult than that. A couple of things to really make sure you're paying attention to dispel an old myth of candy caning or doing this whole arm movement. You know, a lot of people who are trying to shoot the NTS system will do this kind of movement with their bow as they go to draw the bow back. Completely unnecessary and totally a miscommunication and an error there in coaching and an error there in relaying information. So the way that should have been stated is the bow arm, the bow hand, does make an arc motion relative to the torso, not relative in space. Okay? Relative in space would be actually seeing this bow hand do this as you go through your shot cycle. But when I properly execute my form from set to set up, drawing, load, anchor, transfer, release, and follow through, you don't see this hand do this motion ever from set to set up. You don't see that. It goes from set to set up, straight up and down. Now, that means relative to space, this hand does not move left or right. It just goes straight up and then comes and settles back down into the center of the target. But compared to your torso, it moves in an arc. Because as I go from set, and I'll do it without my bow, without my arms, set, set up, set, set up. So as I go from set and I lift the bow, you can see my torso is rotating as I am lifting. As I am doing that, I am building tension into my back and I am starting to really engage the muscles in my back that I'm using to hold the bow back. And what I'm doing is I'm rotating that torso to maintain my alignment, to build up the alignment in the ideal position. So if this hand is moving up and down vertically relative in space, but my torso is moving in this rotational fashion, if I were to not do my rotation, my hand would be doing this. Yes, that is true. It would come up, crest, and I'd settle into my rotation. I lift, set, set up, I crest, and I rotate to get into my position here. And you'll see my hand moves up and down vertically as I'm going from set to set up, set, set up, set, set up. So the bow hand relative to the torso moves in an arc fashion. But totally forget about that, and it really confuses people. It is not something that should be taught. The bow hand moves vertically up and down as you go from set to set up. The torso rotates as you do that same movement, and that is setting your alignment. There's some things to be careful with in regards to barebow that I've learned in addition to the bow hand height change, and that is you are going to need a little bit more tension down here in set position to keep your finger position in the proper place, in the proper crawl more specifically. I found that if I relax a little bit of tension here and I'm not kind of pulling a little bit against my brace height, that my fingers tend to slip on the string a little bit. And that definitely was exacerbated by the problem that I was using halo center serving like I do on my Olympic style recurve due to the slickness, the clean crisp release that I like, and I had to switch to power grip in order to prevent my hand from slipping, as well as adding a little bit more tension too. If you're interested, I'll put a link in the description below for power grip center serving, so you can check that out. If you are an Olympic style recurve shooter and you have nothing but halo, you're probably going to want to get some power grip. It definitely makes the crawling a lot more accurate and you're less likely to slip on the string when you go to lift the bow. Another thing that I've noticed too is that you really have to make sure you drive the lift with this front hand. The front hand does most of the work. This back side does the least amount of work as far as the lift is concerned, because we're really trying to just rotate on this back half and lift more with this front half. So if you really focus on lifting here, and because these two things are connected, this can just kind of trail, the right side can kind of trail as I'm lifting this left side up and down. That's because they're directly connected to each other. But you have to make sure you have that tension against the string to prevent slippage from happening, which means you lose your crawl, and there goes your accuracy. Another thing that I can note is that when I get into set up position, I am always looking on the left side of the bow. If I ever have my string starting to impede my vision here in set up position, look at my alignment. Elbows outside, triangular broken, because I'm not looking down the arrow line and I'm not aiming. I'm pointing to the left of the target. My arrow is heading that direction because my hand is slightly outside of my center line, allowing me to get to the alignment here in my shoulders as well as the elbow behind the arrow line, which is your secondary part of alignment. If you're looking for another good resource on this style of shooting, the KSL Shot Cycle or the NTS System, I'm going to recommend this book here. It's called Total Archery Inside the Archer by my coach Kaminski Lee, as well as a old teammate of mine, Tyler Benner. And it has everything in here in full color, lots and lots of details on how to execute this form properly. So if you're looking for a manual to read in addition to these videos, I'll recommend this book. I'll have links in the description below. And please do consider supporting this channel. There are a lot of links down in the description below on how to support this channel. I'm working to produce this content for free for everybody at home to enjoy and be able to use worldwide, because there's just not enough archery information out there, especially when it comes to barebow and barebow form and technique and theory and ideology. So, you know, I'm happy to share, and I don't want to put this stuff behind a paywall. I want it to be free and accessible for everybody out there, and everybody's contributions and support of this channel genuinely makes a world of difference, and I can't thank you all enough. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider hitting the subscription button and the notification bell, as well as the like button. I would appreciate it. Also, please consider supporting my channel. If you head to my website, jakekaminski.com, there'll be info and links on Patreon, apparel, books, and equipment sales, PayPal donate button, a P.O. box to send things to, and above all else, please share this video because there's no better advertising than word of mouth.